Good evening. I'd like to open and call to order the December 19th, 2024 School Committee Special Meeting held in the School Committee Conference Room at the Stoughton Public Schools District Office at 31 Pierce Street, Stoughton, and also held virtually pursuant to the Attorney General's updated guidance on holding virtual meetings pursuant to the Act extending certain COVID measures of March 29th, 2023, as extended through March 31st, 2025. We have a quorum present, so let's begin. I would like to note that Chris Shannon is online. The rest of the school committee members are in person. This meeting is being recorded by SMAC for future broadcasting. Please rise if you're able for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Chris, can you hear us all right? Chris, can you hear us? Oh.
Yeah.
Yes, okay, great. All right, the next item on the agenda after calling to order is public comment. I will give it just a couple seconds. I don't see anyone else online, and there's not currently anyone here. Going once, going twice. All right. Give it another, I'll give it to 6:35, and then we'll move on. Certainly don't want to cut anyone short if they're sprinting to their computer and trying to get the sound on. Well, let's move on to the FY 2026 budget and articles. I'd like to turn it over to the Budget Working Group and Dr. Baeta.
Okay. So, Dr. Baeta, can I just turn it over to you?
Sure. Thank you all. Madam Chair, on behalf of myself and my family, thank you all for your support in the last few weeks, and especially this week with the passing of my dad. I can't be more thankful for the support I've received, not only from the community and family and friends, but specifically from the five of you in giving me that opportunity to have that time. So thank you again. It's nice to be back. We have put together a school committee budget that will go forward as a recommendation of a 3.8% increase in general, and we'll talk a little bit more about detail about what that means. But the most important part, one of the most important parts for tonight is really to take a look at the budget, as you can see, a different format that's being presented. And I want to briefly talk about why we're doing that, one, and then two, just go through the line so you can see the changes. And Jeff Pickett and I are going to be talking about doing a TV show where we actually put up the budget and go line by line and talk about what does this really mean, so that anybody can then watch it in the future if they so choose. The district fiscal budget template has changed to be grounded on a school-based budget. So you have 8 different pages, and some of them number of pages, that are reflective of what's happening in our schools. And then you have the district-wide area. This will change over time to be all-encompassing, but it takes time to do so in order to get there. So why do it? There's really 5 general reasons on why school systems utilize this process. The first one is full transparency. Any parent, any community member can see how many students are enrolled in a building and say, why do we spend less here and more there, and so on and so forth. So it's just full transparency on what people are making and how much money you're expending on every line item that you can think of that belongs at a school level. And part of that, the second part I already stated, which is comparison. People do like to take a look at why are we doing this, why not that, and so on and so forth, which actually puts more pressure on my office and you, the 5 of you, because we have to be very direct on the reason why we're doing it, i.e. there's more teachers because there's more students, there's more specialized programs. Over time, you're going to see all of that embedded into these budgets. It's best for short-term and long-term planning, because now you can make a direction, if you will, as a school committee and the superintendent's office on why we're spending money over the next 3 years in a certain building versus 5 years in another building versus only 1 year. And that could be because of anything, i.e. We're anticipating that 2 years from now we're starting another specialized program in another building. So there's your quote long-term. Short-term is more of the day-to-day that would take place. Really, the last two is the most important ones, in my opinion, although transparency, you could say, in the public domain is very important. That is, ed reform in 1993 really has made the process of running a building about the principal. And so by going to a school-based budget, that principal now has more control of their line items that they are responsible for. Now, most of these line items are going to be fixed, i.e. salary. You have 25 teachers, it's fixed for the year. But that also changes during the year, potentially. Somebody's out, somebody leaves, you hire somebody at less money, all that stuff. It's the day-to-day operations line items that become important for principals, giving them the opportunity that if they want to, quote, move $250 from X line item to the Y line item, they're doing it based upon the need of the school and what they believe is in the best interest of number 5 reason, which is that it can become much more child-centered, that you're really doing certain things because it's in the best interest of students to, quote, take that money from here and pay for the bus for the field trip because you're anticipating as the principal that that's more important than X. And over time, what you want to do is in good budget seasons, and I would say that this is a tougher one, but in good budget seasons, you can say to principals, listen, you're going to have an extra $2,900 in that line item, and that line item is for you to think about what are those child-centered, student-centered approaches that we would want for this coming year, whatever that may be, from a celebration to an actual academic offering that you want to do, enrichment or something like that. So that's the basis of it. When you look at the budget, it has the name of the school, and we'll just use the cover page one because it's the Jones Early Childhood Center. So it goes from the director position, and it'll go with the original FY25, the recommended 26, and the potential savings, and so on and so forth. The administrative assistant. So a lot of these are individual line items, which doesn't make some people happy. For example, it's not unusual to see the superintendent's office with all the assistant superintendents be one line item in school budgets. I actually think that's not the appropriate way of doing business. It should be whatever my salary is, Matt's salary is, and so on. So we've done that in this budget. We've broken it down to every single department that we're looking at. And again, this is year 1 of 2 or 3 years of really breaking this down year after year. But the goal is also to really begin one of the more important parts, which is our FTEs. This is a really important part long-term because it really will show how many employees we're recommending are in this budget at the beginning of a fiscal year, which also allows for us to make changes and then provide you end-of-year changes on how many more staff did we have to add because of specialized populations, whatever that was. The other part is long-term for me in the way that I've utilized this type of a budget, which I did utilize in my last district for almost a decade that I was there. It's actually started at the second year, is that it leads to a lot of discussions around why do we have to have some of these line items in schools. So you'll take a look at the first page. You've got music, instructional supplies. It's recommended to go up to $153. A $3 increase. Why is that? Well, that's because we stuck to a 2% increase, right? We stuck to a flat number. So it shows you clearly that it wasn't arbitrarily done. Now, the other thing you can do with this, which I actually like to do, is I start to look at this stuff and say, how many students are in the school? How much are we spending for students? How many teachers are in the school? How much money are we spending in professional development? Down the road, you can break it down that way. So then it gives you the totals for the center. In this case, the Jones. And it does that for every single one of our schools. Then, when you get closer to the end of this, you'll see 2 other areas that I think are also critical, besides the district-wide areas, which, again, there's areas there that are representative of the school committee, my office, and then we have the special education office, just to give you exactly how much money we're spending. On the last page, what we have is a little bit of a newer category clearly defined, and that is the budgeted offsets, right? So we have in offsets funding sources that are coming from circuit breaker, shelter aid funds. That's a new one for us, right? Because that's one that will go away over time. You have the IDEA grant, the preschool revolving, the budget turnover, anticipated retirement savings. which in this case is $150,000. And then as you work through all of this, over time, you'll see some more and more of these line items actually moved into the budget. For example, right now, I would suggest that you probably don't know how many people we pay out of the IDEA grant, the special education grant. You should have that information. You should know how much people are being paid for that. And the public should know that we're receiving X number of dollars and we're putting those monies straightly into staff members that the school budget is not having to ask the taxpayer for, as one example. And I know that that's been an area that I know both myself, Mr. Barboza, and Ms. Kreckler down at the Cape heard about. We should get at least some type of a one-pager every year that says these are all our grants, authorizing the superintendent to spend those funds and so on and so forth. Over time, if you had transportation fees, that would be on here. Athletic fees, that would be on here, because they're all offsets to the budget. And you have to show those offsets directly. You can't just decide to have a transportation fee and then buy books with it. It has to literally go just for the actual accounts. So those could be some of the areas that you're looking at. This budget line item, as you know, many of us feel that passing in budgets by the 31st of December is something we should have a bigger discussion about, and I think there's a lot of people on board about that. But this budget recommendation fulfills the recommendation with a 3.8% increase, which brings our total budget to $65,257,429. So that's the bottom line budget that you have. When you go off to the next, to the new cover page, and I'm sorry, Chris, you don't have this in front of you because this is literally new, but I'll make sure it's clear. When you look at the cover page, which is literally that one page with the yellow at the top, that is the what you would call the account numbers, in this case 1,000 through 9,000. What you will see is you have a total 5.50% of that budget. I'm recommending that we change this for the purposes of meeting the goals that we said we were, which means that we will be cutting, I'll be taking from this approximately $1,060,000, so that the reflection would be that the administration line and the instruction line would be lowered. Does that make sense? So if you look at the current FY 25-26 delta, that delta in the administration line would move from 368,733 increase to a 199,970 increase, and therefore from a 20.00 line item increase to a line item increase of 11.33%. The next line item, which is instruction, line item 2,000, would move from 2,849,862 to 1,949,862. The 6.11 becomes 4.2%. Now, when you go all the way to the bottom, we can, when you go all the way to the bottom, yeah, go ahead, you can give it to her. We got a copy for you, Maureen. Maureen, we got a copy for you, so you don't have to. So now when you move all the way down to the delta line, all the way at the bottom, that 5.50% becomes 3.8, and the new number that replaces the 3457763 increase is 2,389,000. That gets you to exactly the 3.0. On the last page of your budget, we put an explanation that I believe the chair, vice chair, and myself will put a letter together explaining some of this, which talks about that if additional money comes in through SOA, Chapter 70, and or shelter and or even other grants, that we would be looking to make up that $1,060,000, thereby bringing our budget back to 5.5%.
Using state funds?
Using state funds, to be clear, okay? Now, why that? Well, as you know, this budget, as in general, was closer to 7.5%. I brought it down to 5.5%. And the way that this works is twofold. The first fold is you now will have a priority list of, over time, of what the $1,060,000 are in cuts. It's predominantly going to be in personnel, unless we want to dive even further into materials and supplies, which I don't know how we do that. if you take $1,060,000 and you say on average, the high and the low, that the average is 65,000, you can calculate that to about 15 FTEs, on top of the FTEs that we already have cut in this budget to get to 5.5. Now, this doesn't include any changes that the committee can make over time on fees, as an example, bringing in money that offsets this cut becoming less. Now, other part, we have, without giving a number publicly because we're going out for bid, we have an offset in the transportation line item for the purposes of meeting the needs of what we're hearing the increases are. If that increase comes under, you've saved some money. An example, let's say the budget is up $200,000 in transportation, the increase is only $90,000, you're 110 to the good. You now have $110,000 that we can put somewhere else into the budget, as an example. The other part that could happen is we don't know what the Chapter 70 SOA foundation budget is going to look like for next year. We won't know that until the middle of January. So we meet the deadline of the charter, A, with no controversy, straightforward, but we leave ourselves the opportunity that state funding should come back to the school, 100% of it, if in fact there's money there, because that's how we survive. But we're not seeking, at least at this time, we're not seeking any discussions of other funds. As you know, I've publicly have said this a number of times, I don't believe in cutting other budgets so that the school budget can get what it needs, i.e. cut police and fire to X, Y, Z. I don't think this town is at that point. One of the things we have to do is we have to get to a sustainable number as a school district. So this spring into the, I'd say late spring, what I'm anticipating us looking at is what does this look like in the next 3 years? And giving you what I would call an educated guess. I can put in some numbers for what I think contract raises will cost us. If we have a new transportation contract, I know what that's going to look like for 3 years, because it's usually fixed into the increased cost. The big items are enrollment increases, or with that enrollment decreases, because then that takes away Chapter 70. For us, it's when does the enrollment increases and decreases happen? Remember, October 1st is the due date for our Chapter 70, so we have to be very careful around anything that comes in. So if 25 kids register in January, those numbers are not going to be applied to the January Governor's House 1 budget. We don't see those kids until the next October. So that's the reason why the churn becomes so significant. And then the second part is specialized programs. As you know, as a community, our ELL population is growing by leaps and bounds. It continues to grow on a daily basis of families that are moving into Stoughton. They are renting and purchasing in Stoughton. Stoughton is where they want to be. And they're here, and their children have the right to be educated in Stoughton. The specialized programming is another area where we can take some chances on guessing, if you will, an educational guess on what this looks like based on preschool enrollment. But any student that moves in specialized programming, or any student that moves in that is an out-of-district student, those are numbers that we can't control. Now, we can try to control it by doing a couple of things, and that is to look at your 3 to 5 year budget and say, how many students should we add to protect ourselves from potentially 2 kids move in, 3 kids move in, 8 kids move in, 0 kids move in that are in need of those services. You can have a year with 0. You can also have a year with 12. And all of a sudden, the average cost is $100,000, and now you're $1 million in a struggle. Those things are not like and I say this respectfully, that's not like buying sand and you say to yourself, gas, and you have a fixed number and you know that you have to stay within that number by more than likely. These are fixed costs that come to us unknown. $80,000, $100,000, I always use the $100,000. The $100,000 for a student out of district comes to us, it might be a cost share for the rest of the year, and then next year it's full on here. Well, if your budget's due December 31st and the student moves in February 1st, I didn't budget for July 1st. The money has to come from somewhere. That's the game that we have to play in certain areas. That makes it very, very difficult with school budgets. I'll turn it over to the working group.
Yeah, I think I would just add, I appreciate you saying all that. I think the other piece too is if folks are hearing, this is a budget with a 3.8% increase, the line items reflect a 5.5% increase, but we're cutting positions. It's because we've had those significant changes to our student enrollment and needs of students over the last year that we are mandated to staff for. So that I think the new budget format will really tell the story there too, and allow folks to get into the detail. I also remember, Dr. Bayetta, a couple meetings ago, you had shared that you were recommending transportation fees for the coming year, and those are not built in here as an offset yet. Can you explain that?
Yeah, so what would happen
Sorry, your mic is off.
Sorry.
That's okay.
So what would happen is once the committee decides that, if it decides to go down a road of fees for anything, those fees are mandated to go to the area you voted them to go into. So if you vote a transportation fee, it has to go into the transportation revolving account. If you do an activity fee, an athletic fee, those have to go into those accounts. Those accounts now get offset by that amount. So let's just use $150,000 as collected for transportation as a number. I don't know that to be the right answer, by the way. But we know that we can't charge for transportation students on free and reduced lunch. So right off the bat, that hits a significant number of our students. So you have a fee, you collect a fee, you come up with a family plan fee, which is a recommendation that I've made to you already, and you collect that. That money now goes into that transportation bus fee line item. And now that takes, let's say that line item went up $200,000. Well, if you collect 135, or 150, excuse me, now that line item in the operating budget can reflect $50,000, $115,000 in fees. Now you've got $150,000 to the good for the rest of the budget. So you're paying one line item to open up another line item to offset the cost. That's typically how it works. Now, community like we are, you can have really fast and hard policy and practice. On this date, it's due. Typically, you would have it's due on this date, has to be paid by this date. There are special circumstances that come up. An unfortunate situation of both parents becoming unemployed, a situation of a loss of a family member, homeless. I mean, this can spiral into things. So one of the things we always try to do is get the school committee to reflect their policy or their vote to give some leeway and flexibility as needed and when needed. It's usually not a lot, to be quite honest, because so many of our students will fit into certain categories already. I think the biggest issue is many years ago, things like activities and athletics was voted by the Mass Superior Court, or Supreme Court, that those are not required education. Well, it's no longer considered that. It hasn't been for decades. So therefore, that's where you're able to institute fees in those areas. Prior to that, you weren't able to institute fees because it was considered part of the educational benefit, and you can't charge for an educational benefit, just to name a few. Here's what's going to happen over the, to be long-winded, but just to kind of wrap this around. The next 3 fiscal years in Massachusetts, not counting if the economy goes south, are going to be difficult. First, you're in the last 3 years of the Student Opportunity Act, which is not a grant. It is actually a number that stays to the bottom number of your budget and is compounded the following year with the increase. Now, after that money that SOA, which was compiled based upon the needs of students and the needs of districts. Stoughton is one of those, like I said, top 20 districts that saw the benefits of the SOA. I came from one that didn't. What will happen next is going to be the big debate. There are a number of bills that have been filed both by my association and your association, and together, actually, or language that's very close, around we need a specialized commission to really look at the cost of public education in Massachusetts as it relates to many of the things that we do, that when you say to somebody, did you know that we have to provide this service, people will say, well, isn't that a medical thing? How come insurance isn't paying for that? And so on and so forth. Those are really big questions that need to be addressed over the next few years, because we know that the increase in areas such as mental health and student mental health continues to go up. Remember that students are in school for 180 days. They can see their counselor at any point, and they can have it in their IEP and see their counselor for 30 minutes, 45 minutes a week, check-ins, whatever is agreed upon, or they can just be a student that goes down to the office and says, I want to see my counselor because whatever. What happens to the remaining 180 days that they're not in school? What happens when they leave school at 3 o'clock? What's going to happen during Christmas break, to the holiday break, where all of our students are home for almost 2 weeks and their counselors aren't available to them? These are real issues that we have to try to address as a community. If we believe there's things like reading loss over the summer, I would say that there's probably counseling needs that happen over the summer that we can't provide as a school, and right now is almost impossible to find counselors that are able to take students because of the high need of adolescents and even younger versus the number of counselors and insurance coverage that's available. So, long-winded answer.
Thank you. I think two other things I want to note is that the increase to the administration line does look high, but there's a footnote on here because that includes the set aside for the negotiations that we are in with 3 of our bargaining units. So is there anything you want to add there?
Yeah, very important point, right? We are not hiring administrators. We have 0 increases in administrators throughout the entire district. So we're at a net from last year down. Mm-hmm. But we have to put money somewhere in our budget that notes that the school committee is in negotiations. So we have put money in here. Now, by cutting that line, I'm now causing us to be in a little bit of a hiccup. But the fact of the matter is, those are potentially funds that we find potentially later to offset. But it's really, really important for people to know that we are not hiring new administrators. Some of our administrators' increases are capped at 2%. Some of our administrators will be at roughly 3.5% or thereabouts. And again, except for Unit B, everybody else that's an administrator is a non-union administrator. So those are situations that happen with my office through you folks. That's a great point, Lindsay.
Yeah, thank you. And then just to underline something else that you shared. So this budget, the line items in the budget are currently not fully funded by a 3.8% increase. So what that would mean is that we would either need to secure about $1.06 million in additional funding, as you said, through Chapter 70, once we know what that number is at the end of January, through other state sources, or to continue to take a look at our budget and evaluate which services and line items we can continue to reduce in order to close that delta. So we are exploring 2 avenues to do that, but it's typical for us to continue to make changes as we find out more about enrollment, like what grade levels, what schools. So town meeting will approve. Well, town meeting votes on the bottom line of the school budget, but it's typical for things to shift as our student needs shift within that budget. So that would continue to happen in this context, but it looks a little different because we are trying to close that just over $1 million delta here.
So really, really important point, and I'll add one statement. We are not looking to add any staffing except in OCR, Office of Civil Rights requirements under IDEA or ELL. 0. There is no requests for classroom teacher, kindergarten teacher, so on and so forth. We have to deal with that. It's really important that we are not adding, we're actually decreasing the number of folks working for Stoughton Public Schools in this budget at 5.5 and even more so at 3.8.
And just to reemphasize, we will find out about Chapter 70 and increases through the Student Opportunity Act at the end of January, usually late January when the House budget is.
Yeah, 22nd, 23rd, 24th is usually when it comes in, right around there.
Yeah, so we are on track to vote a budget by the end of the year as required by the charter, but would continue to evaluate those sources of funds as we get more information.
Yeah, we're meeting our local statutory requirements as a school committee and the superintendent, showing faith in the process and understanding that parties beyond the school committee also recognize that any increase to Chapter 70 SOA really needs to be part of this budget.
And just to, the purpose of that, the Student Opportunity Act was to make sure that students with higher needs are getting the funding that schools need to meet those needs. And so that is why Stoughton continues to receive increased amounts through that legislation.
Yeah, I think it's important too in that statement that the Student Opportunity Act has been about equalizing the game for communities who for decades did not get their equal share. That's the original intent. And Stoughton was putting a lot of it on its local taxpayer without getting its fair share of the lump sum that the state had available for education. If that makes sense.
Yeah. Okay. I think that's all I have, so I'll stop too.
Well, before we get any further, any questions from the committee on kind of the general discussion that we've had? Yes, Armando?
I'm going to have a question.
Yes, of course.
Actually, I'm going to ask harder questions. I'm going to ask you to bring out your crystal ball. I am concerned about academics and reaching into the classroom where cuts will eventually cause a decrease in academic achievements. I was wondering if you could just talk a little bit where Stoughton schools are right now, and please talk a little bit about with these cuts where you feel it's going to be, and also on the population increase of Stoughton, which is a talk everyone seems to be having at this point. I was wondering if you could look into your crystal ball and determine if this is just a bubble population increase, or is it something that you see it's going to be sustained for long term. If it's a bubble, I don't think we'd have to worry a great deal about budgets or budget increases. But if it's not a bubble, that coupled with needs of students, with wage pressure, as I think you had spoken before, that we're not getting as many teachers as we like out of universities. And just give the town a sense of a prediction, which of course is very hard. Where we're going, academic achievements, where we are, where we're going. Also, can these cuts be sustained given wage pressures, population increases, and what you're seeing out there?
Yeah, so hard question, right? I'll take the easiest part. We brought in the NESDEC enrollment comparisons that the district hadn't been doing solely to provide the school committee that based on birth rates, based on what we're seeing for the churn, our numbers are that we're going to be increasing enrollment steadily over the next 10 years. We're getting to right around that 4,200 number of students from the current number of 3,800. So while the state is seeing an overall decrease of 7.2% in enrollment, we're actually seeing something closer to 7 to 8% increase over that same amount of time. And so that's the reason why if that report is showing that year after year, so it just did for year 2, now we're going to year 3 and so on, we can then start to say to ourselves, this looks pretty predictable So therefore, what does this mean for our budget over the next 3 to 5 years, year 7, year 10? It means another kindergarten teacher. It means another high school teacher. It means another middle school teacher. It means. So you can start to do some of that. And if you have a decline, then you know you don't have to do it. There'll be some areas where you might have a decline in the year prior. So this year to last year, let's say as an example, 12 less students. But then next year it goes up 56. So what just happened? Why did that happen? Some of that is also the economy. What would happen if the economy tanked? If the economy tanked, what does that mean to Stoughton? We are a combination of blue-collar and out-of-town employees, right? We're a bedroom community in one way, and in another way, we're working right in town, and there's some local businesses here that are actually expanding and growing, as we know from recent news. So that's the easiest one. The problem, the second part is I would refrain from recommending changes in staffing in K-3. That would be my last area to even consider. Because the foundation of literacy, the foundation of numeracy, the foundation of supports for students in need, the foundation of SEL are all, I think, long-term embedded in K-3 education, which is a struggle, as we know already. Not too many folks could sit in this seat and sound like a salesman and say the following statement, and I'll say it. I'm an outsider in terms of the superintendency in Stoughton and the education system. I'm a product of it, as you know. But we are doing things in Stoughton that I've never seen done for 15 years before I came to Stoughton. Well done. Targeted curriculum, targeted supports. We just recently received back-to-back years of improvements in some of our elementary schools. We just increased our enrollment for the first time to numbers we've never seen at the Jones preschool, ever seen, with 90 kids on the waiting list. That means that people are understanding what we're trying to do, more parents engaged at that younger level. I still think we have more to do that. Our high school's performance, as you know, from the AP scores and recognition as a bronze medal, is due to our increased number of students participating that in some cases are not traditional students that participate in things like AP. And we have a very changing demographic. And then, of course, our MCAS results, it was the last year of it, quote, matter, kids having to graduate with it. But the increase that we saw in populations of high needs was why it was recognized as a school of recognition, because we had student populations that typically don't do as well really do well. I'll give you some numbers hot off the press from today from Principal Miller. We have an over 55% drop in student discipline at Stoughton High School in comparison of September to December this year to last year. And you'll get a report from Ms. Miller in January when she comes to present other stuff. She's going to do it all in one night. And I mean, huge numbers. When you look at the numbers, you just say, okay, wait a minute, is there a data problem here? That's how significant the change is. And I think that encompasses, the staff and the administration, which is all together, finally organized in a good way, is hitting where it should be. It's not perfect, but it's hitting where it should be. We know that our cell phone problems at the middle school are down significantly. Kids are understanding it. We're paying more attention to the little things so that they don't become big things. And the big issues are down across the board in 6 to 12 in comparison to the numbers I dealt with last year. My first year here, I was a little shocked by some of the data that I saw. And now we're going the other way, which is a testament to our administration and to our entire staff in every single role that we have. So the last part is really talking about academic achievement, right? And as you know, you'll be getting a report from me, regardless of budget cuts or anything else, that talks about this is our starting point for the next 3-year triennial plan. And I think we have some real targeted areas that we need to target. In particular, they're going to be utilizing different forms of different data, not just an MCAS data. But if you look at it, we have some areas in the testing areas of 3 through 8 where we need to make some significant improvements. And those principals and leaders are having those discussions with staff. They're talking about data. They're talking about why are we reading this type of a book and not that type of a book, and so on and so forth. Those discussions are taking place at the local level, at a higher level than I would be able to get into details today. And lastly, one of the core things that we're seeing is our instructional coaching that we've added into the district, which is teachers working with teachers to improve best practices and student outcomes. And we already are seeing data from classroom teachers, from the principals, that shows improvements in student outcomes and supports where students are doing better. And this is predominantly a K-5 initiative. The budget cuts in a school system typically deal with one thing: people. It's your highest part of the budget. You can only cut so much of everything else. Last year was $1.8 million in materials and supplies before we hit people for another $500,000. This year we're saying we're just taking that $1.8 million cut to those line items. We're only increasing them by 2%. You just saw one that's a $3 increase. Not a very good increase for a line item. So the offset of that is then you have to start talking about people. So typically what you look at your class sizes, you look at programming. So you look at what must we have, what's nice to have, and appropriate for learning. So discussions on really difficult things like electives at the high school level, school schedules, all of those things can be impacted in a negative way. Again, that's just the way budgets flow when you have bad budgets. And then what happens is recouping that negative becomes twice as hard. It's in the mindset of many, some, I'll clarify, some, eliminating people means we pay less. But what's the outcome on academic achievement? Does it hurt? We know that class sizes increases in K-3, specifically in K-1. The research is very clear. You can Google it. K-1 class size is incredibly important, much more so than it is anywhere in education, in K-12 education. Class size in K-1, huge thing. We've really had good class sizes in Stoughton, but this year we've seen those class sizes go up for the first time in a while. You know, the goal of being at 18 in kindergarten is a goal we're not meeting, as an example. And that's after adding staff this year because we had that spike in enrollment. So there will be a negative impact on student achievement and student outcomes with budgets that have a direct impact on programs and staffing. There's no way about it. I mean, you know, if you go in for an oil change, there's no mechanic that can do the oil change, but you can rotate the tires, that's great, but you still got an oil problem. Well, we're going to have the same types of issues long term, unfortunately.
Other questions? Karen, Chris? Oh, Karen.
So I got to get real basic because a lot of this stuff I don't understand right now. So I just want to understand it. You originally asked, or originally put a budget together. It was 7.4 over what we had last year, and that was going to give level funding for everything. All programs were going to be funded. We wouldn't have to lay off any teachers. We wouldn't be looking at electives being dropped. So there was a 7.4 budget. That budget got dropped to 5.5%, which cut over $1 million from the budget, which means something's going to give. Something's going to give. $1.5 million is not something you can just make up easily. And then, again, you went from a 5.5 down to a 3.8, cutting another $1 million plus. So now we're in a real bind. So the first cut from that budget from 7.4 to 5.5, I believe you said that was going to cut 14 full-time employees. Do I have that number correct? And then the second cut that we're doing to the superintendent's recommended budget is now going to cut an additional about 15 employees. So we're talking about losing almost 30 employees, and I want to know why.
7.4%, you can say is somewhat unsustainable over time. You can't continuously go back for sevens and sevens and sevens. It just doesn't, that's not going to be sustainable. Eventually, you're cutting even more. So what I did in this particular case, to go from 7.4 to the 5.5, is I said, over the next couple of years, we're going to be cutting budgets. So therefore, we're going to cut something this year. And what did we target? We targeted $500,000 worth of positions that were solely supported by shelter funds, which are going away. If that makes sense. When we got to the 3.8%, which was the recommended number from the town manager working with the select board, it comes down to a very simple road. By December 31st, the select board has to send up a balanced budget. They can't forward a budget that's not balanced. So what happens is, you meaning the school committee, meet that 3.8 with an understanding that that we have to go after other funds. Or you send up a 5.5 and the select board has to cut, and will cut in order to balance the budget at 3.8. So now they're just arbitrarily saying we're cutting the school department by $1 million. They don't really know what they're talking about, no disrespect to them. Town manager doesn't either. They're just using that 3.8 hard number as the number that's going forward.
Just add,
Yep.
that number is not just like made up, it's based on calculations of revenue and like what we can reasonably expect to come in through state aid, the tax levy, and all of that. So that's the starting point. Just want to make sure that.
So the history is by sending forward a budget that meets the, quote, recommended budget, you folks still have, through really two ways. Number one, through FinCom to make an argument for more money, and where is it coming from, because you know that there's money available, i.e. Chapter 70, SOA, shelter money, all of that. Shelter money, you don't need to go to any other board. That's yours. You make that decision. Some folks would argue that, quote, Chapter 70 goes into the general fund and then it can go out. There's a local community that actually does it that way. That's not the intent of the money, but there are communities that do that. It's my understanding that the Chapter 70 money will come above and beyond, will come to the school department. That everybody is clear about that. And I would argue that the last source and most important source of any decision is actually the town meeting. Anybody at town meeting can get up and say, I'd like to move $1 million from XYZ to the school department so they don't have to make 15 more cuts, if we're at that point. So do you make the decision of the 3.8 with the understanding that we're going after more funds in order to meet the local statutory requirement, which is not aligned at all to the state requirement of when actual House 1 comes out? It's literally like 23 days. If we could wait 23, 24 more days, you could actually vote a budget knowing facts. That's all we're asking for. Literally, that's all we're asking for. And we could have our budget completely done and ready to go the day House 1 comes out at like 11 in the morning. We could have our numbers the next day, hard numbers, and the following Wednesday, Thursday, Monday, the school committee could vote it, and I could have it, the 30-page document sent up. And you would actually have your actual Chapter 70 allocation.
So I'll just add, in the meantime, this is based on the revenue that we know about and can plan around, and we're budgeting based on that. And then also knowing that, like, this is the situation it puts us in, making plans for that additional funding that we hope will come in through Chapter 70, and we'll be advocating and, looking for ways to I mean, Chapter 70 is what it is, but there are other ways we can advocate with the state and seek additional funds there. The other thing I'll put out there too is, I know I mentioned this, I think, a meeting or two ago, but there are some longer term opportunities to do some strategic planning around specifically in our triennial plan, around like some things internally that might help us structure things more effectively. So that's a long-term plan to start with the new triennial plan when that comes up later this year, which I know is not directly related to the question you asked, but I feel like it just is helpful context to keep in mind too, especially when we think about things like special education and state funds that might be available there. Are we maximizing those? So,
just to add to Karen, some of the issues here is there are two fundamental changes that have happened, one locally, one statewide. The statewide is, regardless of how I voted or you voted, there's the millionaire's tax, which is for K to 16 public education. It's actually pre-K to 16. Right now, there's been some grants for literacy. There's been some grants for preschool. Everybody's having a hard time with it because of space, as we've talked about before. And then there's been some grants towards early college with more kids going to college and paying for that and so on and so forth. But there's millions upon millions of dollars out there that many of us voted for that still hasn't been acted upon. And I would like to know from our representatives, what is the goal of those funds? Number one. Number two, it's my understanding, and you can correct me if I'm wrong because I wasn't here for it, but I heard about it last year. We had a free cash plan. It was, I believe, $300,000 every year down to zero to be used in operating budgets. It's been decided to make that go quicker. Well, that adds a burden. And again, I'm not second guessing, I'm just being factual. There isn't $600,000 available in free cash for any budget. There isn't $1 million, there isn't. So if it was originally $200,000, it's supposed to come down to 1.7, then 1.4, then 1.1, then all the way down to zero. And it was pushed by the parties that control that. That's not a decision I can make. I have no authority over that. But it takes away from the plan of how to wean yourself off of something that you're used to utilizing it. Good, bad, or indifferent, the plan was changed. That plan change now also has a direct effect on budgeting.
I'm a simple girl. I try to keep it simple. As much for me as it is for the people who watch this and for the people who will watch this, there may be some people in the Finance Committee that understood everything you guys said. And there is going to be the rest of the 30,000 people that live in Stoughton that have no idea what SOA, Chapter 70, or House 1 is. There's a lot of people, they're probably not even watching this, but at some point they're going to hear that almost 30 staff are going to be cut, and they're going to want to know what happened. So I just want to make things at least as clear as we can as we sit here so that we can go back and say, we really tried to explain it to the town. So maybe I can just kind of tell you what I heard, because I'm not a finance person at all. So I heard that the town can only afford for us to get 3.8%. There's no free cash. We don't know what kind of state aid we're going to get yet. That comes 23 days from now, so it would be nice if we could wait, but apparently that's not going to happen. So right now, we're just going to try to increase our budget by 3.8%, and then I guess we're just going to cross our fingers and hope that maybe some of these positions can be brought back, some of these electives can be brought back. Maybe we can not have to institute fees again. I assume fees were meaning not just the buses, but also fees for athletics, fees for music, fees for other things that maybe we do. So I just want to be clear, and I don't even know if there's something that we could do where we kind of make this more palatable for people who are just like me, just people, who really want to understand what happened, because that's going to be the next step. As soon as this comes out, everyone's going to say, oh, what happened? And I want to be able to explain it to them. Not sure if I could.
Yeah, so just real quickly, I think it's really important for us to get into, if we want to get into just a general statement of this, that the school committee hasn't voted any fees yet, hasn't deliberated it in terms of discussions and so on, and it's way too early to do so. That's one. And there's many views of that. I get bombarded about fees on both sides of the aisle, probably more so than any other topic. The second one is we have not made any recommendations or cuts to this $1 million worth of staffing and or anything at the high school for electives or anything else. Those are all part of the process that could happen. I don't think it's fruitful for the town of Stoughton's families and children on December 19th, because of a charter requirement, to get into the details of what does that really mean. I think it's House 1 comes out, and then we really know what it means. Is it 30, or is it 14, or is it 7, or is it 35? We can't assume that right now. And so it's been my conservative viewpoint that telling people today that we're cutting 14 elementary teachers and 15 high school teachers is just not good for the system, because we don't have the facts on what this is going to look like. And if it's not there, then there's going to be a bit of a bigger discussion, which is what is going to be the activism of not only the school committee but families around what these cuts should be. And if we have to make cuts, that's what we have to. I will give you as many avenues for you to consider, because it's your decision. I'll give you my best educational plan to try to continue to move the district forward, while at the same time having to absorb whatever the cuts are going to be. That's my role in giving you as much information as possible. And that's the reason why I think it's important to meet the deadline and then get into more of the weeds afterwards. The head of care is, if you start to look at line items and budgets, you will see that you are down 2 people. You can eliminate the $153 line item if you want for instructional supplies for whatever that line item was that I read earlier. But you're going to have to do a lot of $153 line items to get to $1 million. And that's why discussions around fees take place, because they make that $153 line items not a priority.
No, that's okay. I just wanted to try and make it at least as clear as possible that we have a budget that isn't going to sustain what we have right now just because the town doesn't have it. It's not because we don't want to make that budget. It's because the town just can't absorb it right now. And there are all kinds of reasons behind that, I'm sure. I'm not select board, I'm school committee. So I don't know what that is, but from what it sounds like you're saying is that the town can only absorb 3.8%, so that's what we're going to give them. And then we have to decide what is going to be cut to get to that 3.8%. We have to cut $2.5 million. And we're going to have to find it one way or another. And hopefully, when we get some numbers from the state as to what kind of grants or aid we might be able to get, then maybe we can add some of those back in. Is that what I'm understanding? Is that kind of the basic, if I could just get it real basic?
The basic is to build back the $1 million based on available funding. And if it's $2 million in SOA money, then I would say that you're going to be seeing me want to request a level services budget, not 5.5.
Thank you, I appreciate that. Hopefully it helped other people.
Thanks, Karen. Chris, I want to give you the chance to ask any questions or add in. I don't want to forget you over there.
Yeah, no, thank you. be a big black box that townspeople have been pointing at for some time. And it's a big line item in the town budget, and there's always been a lot of consternation and guessing in terms of where that money is going and why it needs to increase. So I hope that this additional level of transparency will help. And it's I think, Lindsay, we've been using the term radical vulnerability. It's a radical vulnerability because there's no guessing as to where the money's going. People can see it plain as day in terms of exactly what is being spent on what. So I really appreciate the effort that you and your staff have gone through to translate the budget into this new format. I know that's not something that happened overnight. So I really want to commend that.
Thank you.
A lot of the questions I had have already been asked, but I really want to iterate as an extremely nervous and anxious school committee member now, how the math just doesn't add up for me, because we have seen increases in student populations, at least since I've been getting the data, consistently. But yet, every year since I've been involved in the school committee, we're not even level funded. We continue to ask staff to do more with less. Less resources, less physical bodies in the room. And I just can't help but wonder, at what point does that really start to have not only a negative impact on the quality of the education that we are trying to provide the students of Stoughton, but the impact that has on the staff with a school district that pays relatively well, but not necessarily as well as some of our peer cities or our neighbors do. If we're trying to attract and retain passionate, well-educated, wicked smart teachers and staff, how can this budget sustain that? How can this budget sustain this increased ask with more students, especially with the growing population of students that do have mandated services that we must provide? So I this is more of a statement, I guess, instead of a question. The question to you, Dr. Baeta, is the potential for an increased reliance from town community members, and perhaps a misunderstanding of the drastic cuts that we continue to endure year after year, that, well, when we finally are in a position to ask for not even just level funding, but maybe even funding that starts to do some of the capital planning that would lead to longer term cost reductions, like in transportation, like we've discussed, or bringing some of our special programming in-house instead of having to pay to send folks out of district for it. That the town people will push back because of the consistency of this underfunding and this low increase that, quite frankly, doesn't even necessarily meet wage increases in COLA, much less the mandates and the changing needs of our student population. How you talk about a 3-year plan, and I'm trying to figure out, Dr. Baeta, how do we make the numbers work so that we are still afloat in 3 years fiscally? I mean, I'm trying to think of an analogy, and the only analogy I can think of is like buying a house. And at first you think, well, we can go generic on fixtures and then more cuts. We don't need a yard, and then more cuts. Well, we can all sleep in one bedroom, and then more cuts. Well, do we really need doors? And it's like, at what point are you just like, in a tent in the street kind of thing. It's just, I'm sorry, I'm doom and gloom here, because I'm spiraling because of significant anxiety I have about how do we right the ship?
So it's not the first time I've had to cut a budget, right? And I think many of you know this, that it swings with what the town can afford and what Chapter 70 says and so on and so forth, and grants or anything else, fees. We're in, the best way for me to approach this is to kind of just target a couple of things you just said. Put it under, since the two of us both like to read and we like movies, put it under the perfect storm, right? The perfect storm here is increase in enrollment with decreased funding, with increased needs, and I'll take the fourth one, which could get me into a little hot water, but lack of activism. The school systems that get what they need are full of activism, whatever that may be, a good active base, and that's not who we have traditionally been in general. We have pockets of it, but we can't really say that we're going to have 400 people show up to a school committee meeting. Unless you announce that you were cutting sports, then you would. But if you were cutting teaching positions, which we are not doing, but if you were saying we're cutting 30 teaching positions, I'm hoping we'd get 400 people out, but I'll tell you right now, I don't think you'll get 100. That's part of our problem. Town meeting in Stoughton, in my time here, has only, in my time as a community participant in different roles, now as superintendent, before town meeting, school committee, we've gone through probably at least a decade, if not two, of eliminating positions through attrition. Somebody retires, we don't backfill. We haven't done it by cutting the budget and laying people off. We've cut the budget by saying we're not going to hire that position. Class sizes will go up a little bit, but we'll deal with it for the year. We just haven't. Added to that, the comment that you made that I think is part of the, maybe part 5 of this perfect storm, which is we are not in an economy that allows for us to just take the social studies teacher that came out of Fitchburg State that I can pay $54,000 bachelor step 1. We're in an economy where you have to steal that person at $85,000 from another district, and that's a low number, $85,000. That's just where we are. There are not people coming out of school to become educators, especially in certain targeted areas. We currently have at least one special education position, if not 2, open in the district, and are doing everything. I got in one case, one administrator that's doing the role of IEP meetings that were done by that position, and doing it, added to their responsibilities until we can find somebody to do it. And that's just one story of many. We have teachers who right now are emailing me because we're in a budget freeze, and emailing me, and I'm approving those things that we said we would consider to approve. That's not the way to run a school system. I need $138 to send 4 kids to the blah, blah, blah. Right? But we're trying to nickel and dime every penny right now in order to be quite honest, in order to see if our funding source, such as shelter, is more readily available for FY26. And then the problem after that is there's no shelter funds the year after that, or likely none. And that creates yet another cliff. Remember, we still don't believe, we, general public, to go to Ms. Powers, your comment earlier, right? We still don't believe that we laid off 17 people last year. 17 part-time and full-time interventionists were not brought back. And yes, some of them were retirees that were working as interventionists, but we had those positions in the budget. We eliminated them. We brought back the K-Powers first under shelter funding, almost $400,000. Those are all facts, but we still had 17 people that were working for us part-time or full-time, predominantly in K-5, no longer here. So that's where we are. So our teachers are doing everything that they can. Our administrators are doing everything that they can. I don't know how many other support staff positions we can cut without really hurting our physical plants and operations and safety and so on and so forth. But we're going to have to look at that. The last thing, and of the perfect storm, if you will, is that it didn't end well. That's a fact. The story doesn't end well. And districts that go back to back to back years of making cuts do end up not doing well. And if there is accountability, MCAS is going away as a graduation requirement, but accountability of MCAS is not going away. And so if you have higher class sizes and student outcomes aren't there, does the state come in and say, hey, Stoughton, what's going on? Sure. All of us have worked at some point or another. We've seen it. I've seen it. I've worked in one of those districts. Helped, to be quite honest, my administration team and my teachers union and support staff got us out of that hole. Took 3 years. And we had to make a lot of changes. And it was during a better time to hire people than we have in this economy. Or at least in this new economy, I should call it.
Catherine, one more comment?
Dr. Bayed, I'm really grateful that you mentioned the cost savings by attrition. I think a lot of the town people who really do set aside the time to watch these meetings so that they're fully informed. That's something that they might appreciate and may have experienced in their own workplaces. That has been prevalent in the past, I would say, 2 decades, where businesses, in order to protect their bottom line for the most part, would simply not rehire for positions that they lose because someone leaves for whatever reason, but the work doesn't go away. So that gets divided amongst everyone who's left, which means you're asking the same people to do more and not necessarily with more money, which is leading to a lot of burnout. And that was highlighted during COVID, and a lessening of job quality. And I want to reiterate that I know I'm dedicated, I know my colleagues on the committee are dedicated, and I know you and your team are dedicated to making Stoughton an employer of choice in every way that we possibly can. So I'm really glad you made that point. Catherine, that was it for my questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Armando?
Yes, I'm trying to find some rainbow in this storm. And when I think of it, I just think of myself as guess estimating, and I'm hoping you can give us more of an educated estimate. And the only rainbow I can find is, and it's related to a budget, is someday in the future, if we have a new South School, there should be a positive impact to the school budget. And I was wondering if you can talk a little about that, what savings we can possibly derive in the school budget if we have a new South School.
Yeah, it's a great question. So there's a couple of different ways to look at it. First of all, in terms of our staffing, I don't know how much of a savings we'll actually see there because it's still the same number of kids, just going to a different place. However, in terms of our instructional practices and resources, you can get a little bit more bang for your buck in purchasing, as an example, and so on and so forth. I think the biggest one is the impact on the opportunities that it gives students that you currently don't have in a school that, in this case, is really falling apart. In terms of the funding, there's a couple of things that you can look at. And the one we always use is it costs more to heat the Jones School than it does the high school. Think about that for a second. So the efficiencies that we can potentially gain in certain areas could be there. And some of those efficiencies, besides utilities and so on and so forth, could be in other areas. For example, I'm thinking of a kind of an outlier one, but food services. Having an actual good refrigerator, good freezer to stack food instead of, what we have to, having a generator that can actually keep that food. Little things like that you might not see a dollar sign to, but that long-term has a positive impact because you're not, quote, throwing away as much stuff. Very small. I think the last part, when it comes to new schools, is the research is now clear, i.e. you have one in Stoughton, that in the first couple of years of a new school, you don't necessarily see high academic gains. But after 5 years of a new school, one recent piece of research actually says that you are seeing high academic gains 5 years later. Now, we know there's a lot of variables there. I get it. But when you look at it, will we actually see the better gains by having students in a, quote, better place to learn and getting 21st century skill development in 2030, 30 years in, instead of some of the, other recommendations that are out there. So just from the top of my head, those would be a couple of examples. I could probably do some more research and get you some more details. Happy to do it.
At this point, do we want to open it up to questions about the budget, its specifics about the budget? Are you prepared? I know that, unfortunately, our Assistant Superintendent of Finance is not available tonight, but...
Yeah, and you'll have one more, I believe we're having one more meeting, and that could be really another meeting. If you have individual questions, I am happy to create a template and have those prepared for you by around that time period. I will say that currently, around the resources, materials and supplies, it's really simple. The cuts that were made last year, absorbed last year, is the starting point for this year plus 2%. So whatever was cut last year, so if you're looking at certain sports, activities, music, and all of that stuff, you're basically, resources went down to that, and we used that for last year as our starting point for this year plus 2%. So that's a starting point. In terms of our staffing, we have 0 additional staffing added to this budget. In terms of general education, we have potential special education positions, i.e. a new TLC program that's going to be going to the Wilkins. However, the net FTE is a significant cut of a minimum of 14 people and as high as 30. So keep that in mind. Those are all factuals, and we have not discussed any offsetting of the budget in terms of fees and everything else, because I think that takes a lot more time for you folks to get more information and really take a look at the facts of Chapter 70. I'll also just want to make sure that we're all using the same terminology. Level services budget is to keep what you had from last year, right? Your services are the same, right? That's different from level funded, where you're literally carrying over the same number and there's no increases and you're just burying everything in the hole, if you will. So no $2.3 million increase. It's like nothing. You're getting nothing. That's not what's here. So for those that will say we're making cuts, because there's always this debate that happens, the budget recommendation does not meet the needs of Stoughton Public Schools currently. With more information, can we get there?
Thank you. Oh, Lindsay.
So I'm thinking to your question previously, if we put together any, like, as now that we've kind of gone through high level, as we put together specific questions, maybe we send those to the chair to send to Dr. Baeta.
Sure.
In advance of the December 30th
Yeah,
meeting.
I would say send them directly to myself and
Okay,
Ms. Perkins.
Okay, cool.
So that Ms. Perkins and I'm sure we'll be communicating. A lot of us are out next week just because we're taking advantage of where everything falls. But we can definitely get some further details to the committee. And I would say let's potentially have a pretty long meeting next Monday, the 30th, that we can really get into further details. of what this could actually mean for the Stoughton Public Schools.
I'm making a note to make sure that I budget the time.
Right, and really important, no question is a dumb question. Only the questions that aren't asked become dumb questions. So feel free to ask whatever it is. I am truly here to give you the best answer that I can find. So, why this, why that, so on and so forth. We're happy, and as you know, Heidi has, she doesn't hold back. She'll tell you exactly what she thinks, and as it pertains to the details of the question and what it could entail.
Does that work for everyone? I actually was drawing out my list, so I will rush home and send them all with you. I have to look because I think a few of them are now answered. Going through that. I do also want to bring up that we do have the articles. We have the 3 that we're recommending to go forward. Again, we're holding back on that stage 1 until we pursue other avenues for that. I do want to give an opportunity to ask any questions about the articles. I think we feel pretty prepared to vote them. We didn't do it last time because we didn't quite know where our budget recommendation was going to land, but I'm open to questions about the articles right now, or even a motion to vote them. First, questions on the articles.
I don't have a question. We've talked about it a lot.
Yes, I feel like we have talked about them, especially the firewall. We know we need to replace that. The number amounts are still the same. So for these articles, I think it's best if we vote them separately because that's how they'll appear in the warrant. The last time we had the issue of financing, where they were being financed by previous leftover monies from previous articles. At this point, we don't know where the money's coming from. That will be up to the town and the finance committee to help decide. So we'll vote them individually, but I'm happy to vote for that tonight, or we can leave those off until next time and vote everything in one huge block. So I'm open to whatever works for.
Let's go for it.
You want to go for it? You want to get the articles knocked off? I'm happy to do that. Chris, you good voting the articles today, or you have a question? Okay, all right. Can I have a motion to approve the article for technology needs, specifically the firewall, for $168,338?
So moved.
All right, that motion was made by Lindsay. A second?
Second.
Seconded by Armando. Because Chris is online, we need to do a roll. Okay. We need to do a roll call vote for this because she's online. So we'll start with Armando.
Aye.
Lindsay? Aye. For me, Chris?
Aye.
And Karen? Aye. All right. So that is carried 5-0. That one is approved to go to town. Do I have a motion to approve the article for the wireless access points for $461,388?
So moved.
All right, that was made by Lindsay. Second?
Second.
Second.
All right. Lag. Sorry about that, Chris. All right. Roll call vote. Armando?
Aye.
Lindsay?
Aye.
Myself? Aye. Chris?
Aye.
Karen? All right. Aye. So that's a 5-0 for that one. And then the motion to approve the article for the redistricting consultant for $90,000.
So moved. Or motion to approve the redistricting consultant for $90,000.
That was made by Lindsay. Second, Chris?
Aye.
All right.
Second.
So we discussed the second for that one. Armando?
Aye.
Lindsay?
Aye.
Myself, aye. Chris?
Aye.
And Karen, aye. All right, 5-0. So that's a total for the articles, if I did my math correctly, $719,726 for the totals for articles for Springtown meeting. So, all right, anything else on budget and articles for tonight? Still time? All right. I do want to talk about the special meeting that we have a plan for the Monday, the 30th. That is going to be a hybrid, so if people would like to come in person, Dr. Baida and I will be here. So otherwise, the online option is available. I know that, Chris, you might have a conflict, so that will be at 6:30. Again, it will be in the conference room at the district offices at 31 Pierce Street. There will be the virtual option. We were not able to post it as a public hearing because of the posting deadlines. The holiday messed with our schedule. However, we can make sure that public comments are on the agenda so that if the public would like to speak to the budget, if the 400 people, we don't have time for 400 people, but if people would like to speak to it, again, there's a virtual option if people are traveling or not able to make it to the offices in time, they will be able to be recognized and to speak with public comments. So I know, Chris, that was we talked about last time about having to be a public hearing. We're not able to do that, but we will have the public comment. So we'd like to give people the opportunity to express their opinions on the budget. That said, motion to adjourn.
Madam Chair, real quick.
Yes, sure.
I just want to wish all of our students, staff, my colleagues, and yourselves and your families and the entire town a wonderful holiday season, and that everybody is safe and spends some quality time with friends and family. Thank you.
I echo that very much. So, yes, second. All right. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
All right. Made by Lindsay. Second.
Second.
Seconded by Armando. Again, we have to do a roll call vote. So Armando.
Aye.
Lindsay.
Aye.
Myself. Aye. Chris.
Aye.
Karen. All right. 5-0. This meeting is adjourned at 7:58 p.m. Thank you all for coming and good night and happy holidays.